Yes, welcome back. 25 to 2. We are, of course, talking about trust in government. Lord Mandelson was released on bail early this morning after that arrest for allegedly passing secret government information to Jeffrey Epstein. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has ordered a former probe into Labour Minister Josh Simmons after claims he ordered a dirty dossier on British journalists. So how much trust is left in the government? Well, remember what Keir Starmer, in fact, incessantly told us.
I'm absolutely determined to restore honesty and integrity to government.
We will carry the responsibility of your trust as we rebuild our country. Country first, party second.
People are listening, putting their trust and confidence in us. We will repay that trust and confidence. Yet still those wounds of trust must be healed.
My government will serve you.
I will not do it with false hope. Not now, not ever. Country first, party second.
The wounds of trust need to be healed. Let's get a word from Clark Vasey, Director of Blue Collar Conservatism, and Daniel Bruce, Chief Executive at Transparency International UK. Welcome to you both. I mean, you heard it there, Clark. There's nothing greater than a damning montage to play in the wake of scandals. But there was Keir Starmer. It was very much, and it always is, I suppose, with an incoming government, to be fair. But certainly Labour do dine out on the wicked old Tories. They're all corrupt. They're all up to something. They're all trousering a few quid somewhere. We're going to come in and we're the new kids on the block. We don't do stuff like, we don't even know millionaires. And then half an hour later, Keir's walking around in about 22 grand's worth of Versace suit. He's off on holiday. Angela Rayner, goodness knows what was going on in Bangladesh, and now Peter Mandelson. Do we have any trust left in this government?
I mean, I don't think so. And I think, you go back to the way they campaigned in terms of talking about trust and trust all through your montage was, it was very much about geared about winning an election. So it was all about the, kind of trust us. We're not the other guys. And, someone who supported the Conservatives was disappointed by a lot of what they did in office. But I think now we're getting the kind of double whammy of trust in that they didn't have a plan for government. So they're not delivering for people, but at the same time, they're not living up to anything like it would seem, the standards that they set themselves before coming to power. So trust has been lost on substance. Trust is being lost in the way the government's operating.
And I guess, Daniel, transparency is the name of the game here, isn't it? And there was very quickly a sense with this government who didn't have that honeymoon period, mostly due to their own making, see winter fuel allowance and farmers for detail, I suppose. But I mean, that's a policy issue. But in terms of transparency, in terms of trust, I mean, it did seem to kind of dissipate rather quickly for this lot.
It takes more than warm words to actually rebuild trust. It takes definitive action, doesn't it? And, to add to your montage, you had the Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street, that first day after the election, saying that, rebuilding trust is the defining challenge of our era. And it is. And if it is a defining challenge, it needs concerted action. And all that we've really seen when it comes to the standards regime in government, the kind of guardrails for good conduct that will rebuild trust, is just a bit of tinkering around the margins. And the public see this, and global experts see this. In our annual Corruption Perceptions Index, which came out just earlier this month, the UK had fallen again to a new low, and that survey period starts to cover those first few months of the Labour government, and the sort of, again, the challenges around big money politics that we're seeing, and the relationship between wealth and power and access, which is common in many of the things we've been talking about in recent weeks.
And I guess, in fairness to any government, if you were to just take a general poll at any point and go out to members of the public and say, do you think the government are a bit shocking? Most people would go, yes, they are. They're all in it for themselves. There are, we do, in some respects, correctly always hold them to this account, and we're quite cynical of politicians just by definition of what they do. But I guess with this, when you think of something like this whole Epstein thing, where there were such obvious areas that could have been spotted, and you sort of think, hang on, there's lots of people around the Prime Minister, often who are paid more than the Prime Minister, people that literally are meant to know where the bear traps are in these stories. I mean, the Epstein thing is just classic. 2009, there was Peter Mandelson staying at Jeffrey Epstein's house. That must have been a matter of public record, because he was Deputy Prime Minister, essentially, at the time. that never came up, or if it did, it was ignored. And I wonder whether politicians just think it's going to be all right in a kind of chronic case of ultra naivety, or are they stupid, or are they just hopeful? What is it? What's going on there?
Well, we think it's all a symptom of a system that just isn't working properly. You know, if we had transparent lobbying of government, if we had conflicts of interest that weren't just declared but were properly managed, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. You know, you've cited the dates already. This goes back nearly 20 years, and it's taken the disclosure of files by another country's law enforcement to actually bring us to the situation
which this government knew were coming, those files. They did, which makes it even more interesting, doesn't it? Because they knew that at some point Trump was going to release these Epstein files, so they might have thought, well, there might be something in it, Clark. There could be, there could be one of, our guy might be mentioned. We know he was friends with him.
You would think so. I think, you say, is it stupid? I think there's a large sense of arrogance that you do see amongst kind of a lot of politicians, that and it does show through in the way that the Labour Party campaigned at the last election, which was that this group of people here are inherently better than this other group of people here, and just trust us because of we're great, aren't we? Whereas actually we're now seeing that kind of the depth wasn't there in terms of policy. If the government was delivering and people felt like, actually these aren't the greatest group of people I've ever seen, but I feel like my life's getting better, they might be more forgiving of some of the ways in which they're behaving. But that's not how people feel. So there isn't really anyone that feels like they're getting a huge amount out of this government. So when you pile in the kind of the perceptions of what it means in terms of how they go about their business, then all of a sudden it does start to look like kind of this is another government that's not delivered and just isn't operating the way that it should.
But the sort of vainglorious nature, I suppose, of politicians like Mandelson himself, you might have thought when this whole gig came up over there in Washington, where you're literally called your excellency, which must have appealed to him in the most seductive kind of fashion. He might have thought, well, hang on, these Epstein files are coming out. I'm going to be mentioned in them more times than the word donkey is mentioned in the nativity story. I'm bound to come up, even if I've done nothing. I'm going to come. You might have thought he'd have said, I'm sorry, I better not take this gig. But he was never going to turn that one down, was he?
Well, clearly he didn't turn it down. And I think that, kind of probably you do start to believe your own hype. That Peter Mandelson has been there throughout the transformation of the Labour Party, from the kind of picking the red rose in the 1980s through to kind of the peak of Blair, and there's just probably a sense that the rules don't apply to him.
And I suppose one of the problems, Daniel, is that individuals don't always see it as corrupt. I'm thinking back to Boris Johnson's wallpaper. He couldn't for the life of him remember who the hell had given him 100,000 quid or whatever it was, and everyone was scratching their heads going, well, hang on, how would you not know that like that? Surely you would know. Now it probably wasn't illegal, or even didn't have to be corrupt, but it goes on and on and on for weeks and months, and then it starts to look a little bit corrupt. So to politicians, I mean, what's the answer to all this? Do politicians just need better training? Do we need different kinds of politicians?
We've done polling in past years, going back to the Johnson days, where actually, a cross-section of voters of all political persuasions just want to see stronger rules with independent oversight. Numerous independent bodies have recommended measures like, putting the ministerial code on a statutory footing, giving the so-called ethics advisor more teeth and independence with due oversight as well, to be able to investigate breaches more quickly. But, fundamentally, we still rely on a system that is based upon convention, upon the good chaps theory of government, and it's so often that which lets us down. But
I was just going to say, at the time of the Boris thing, we just had Oscar Redrup with us, who was an advisor to Boris Johnson. Maybe I should have asked Oscar this specific question. When it came to sort of the wallpaper thing, like, you'd think somebody would just go, right, Boris, just go out there and say that, okay, this is where the wallpaper came from, this is how it was funded, and that's it. But there was such obfuscation and kind of dodging of the question And of course, Boris being Boris sort of bumbles his way through answers, even when he's being upfront. So it just sounded all shades of iffy, didn't it?
It did. And, as someone who's supported the Conservative Party for many years, there was a lot that they did that disappointed. And, and I think that the public's had this perception of disappointment in their politicians going back quite a number of years now. It's not, kind of around that time when Mandelson was sending, staying at Epstein's or whatever, was around the time of the expenses, which was again another big hole in that perception that the public had of, these guys are supposed to be working on my behalf, delivering from me. And I think that, we've got a system which is quite bloated, which does, kind of lavish extra, kind of goodies on, those that are in power.
Yeah.
Whereas, if we had something that was a bit leaner, had people focused on, right, how do I deliver for those who put me there, which ultimately should be the test of any politician.
I mean, the expenses, I'd forgotten how, journalistically, how delicious that story was. I mean, it was a daily Telegraph drip, wasn't it, of these just incredible stories. And we all remember duck houses and stuff like that, but your cushions from Harrods or John Lewis or wherever it was. But again, that was I suppose a classic example, Daniel, of politicians thinking, well, no, hang on, I was told that I was allowed to make these claims because I'm not meant to be living in a hotel. I'm allowed to have a second home in London. I'm allowed to furnish it in a way that would look like my first home. That's part of the gig. So they didn't see they were doing anything wrong. And in fact, even in that particular example, there were many names, of course, that were caught up in expenses that were, some of the ones you'd least expect.
Yeah, it was...
halcyon days.
It was perhaps a culture at the time around duck houses and whatever it was that felt allowable. I think there's one thing that's worth teasing out from that period, though, which is that partly because of the way it was all drip fed out over a sustained period, and MPs were waking up at breakfast wondering if it was their turn that morning. But it led to really systemic change to the way expenses were handled, and indeed to how much we pay our MPs, as did, if you go back to the mid-90s, the Cash for Questions affair, which led to the creation of the standards in public life, which we still hold dear today and should be being held dear by those in public office today. And we've seen less of that systemic reform in recent years when things have gone wrong under this government and under its predecessor governments. We've seen very reactionary positions taken, and I think it's that getting back to understanding what the systemic lessons are that we need to learn to stop this sort of thing happening in the future.
Yeah, really I remember speaking to one MP during that expenses time, and he was talking to another MP, so I'm off to Curry's or whatever to buy a new TV. And the other MP said, you don't have to pay for that. He didn't say it to him in a, here, mate, guess what? He genuinely said, you can claim for that. He said, really? Can I? Yeah, absolutely. It's completely legit. And that's kind of how many of those people translated it. It was just part of their work package, as it were. Just before we finish, I want to play you a voice note to both of you. This comes from Helen, and it's on Keir Starmer. Here it is.
Afternoon. So I don't know anybody that won't actually stand up for Starmer or say anything good about him. So I've got a friend that I've known for a long, long time, 40 years actually, and he always voted Labour. And I said, tell me one good thing about Keir Starmer. And all he does is go on about Farage or about racism, things like that. So even he will not come out and say one good thing.
So even die-hard Keir Starmer supporters can't say one good thing about Keir Starmer. I mean, has it got to that level, do you think, in this story, Clark, where you can't redeem this, you can't in any way turn a corner if you're Keir Starmer?
I mean, I'm astounded at the suggestion that there's a die-hard Keir Starmer fan is something that exists. But I think absolutely, it kind of goes back to kind of point a moment ago that they're not delivering on the things that they said they were going to deliver in office. It was very clear that there wasn't a plan for government. So you layer on top, kind of what we're going through now, and kind of those things will play out. And clearly, Mandelson is an issue which has captured the public attention. that it has gotten through, and it's so you are layering upon that, kind of disappointment in the government, and so it's like, well, what is the point of Keir Starmer's Labour Party?
It is interesting, Daniel. It's sort of a wider point about how territorial people are with politics, and I've always thought there was a fascinating correlation between Jeremy Corbyn and Nigel Farage in that their own fan bases were so fiercely loyal and remain so in many respects. And so if you said anything about Corbyn, a die-hard Corbynite would be on you like a rabid dog, and similarly with Nigel Farage. Starmer doesn't seem to command that same, he hasn't quite got that same culty thing going on. So perhaps in that respect, does that put him in a more dangerous position? Because we know there's plenty in his own party that aren't that happy and be quite happy to see the back of him.
Well, don't forget Labour Together, which is a very powerful campaign group, which has propelled him to the leadership position that he's in, which finds itself exclusively attached to Josh Simmons. So that's perhaps the closest he had to that. But frankly, whoever is in charge, and whatever complexion their politics, to rebuild that public trust, we've got to clean up political finance, we've got to protect standards in government, and we've got to deal with rogue and corrupt practice in Parliament. No government has gone far enough on that in recent years, and they ignore it at their peril, because that ultimately comes down to the trust that ordinary voters have in our democracy.
Indeed. Daniel, good to see you, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Daniel Bruce and Clark Vasey. Thank you, Clark. Nice to see you again with us here on Talk. Over to you, 0344 499 1.